Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're tackling a big one. Happiness. Quite the topic.
It really is. Everyone's searching for it, right?
Exactly. So we've pulled together a really interesting mix of your sources. We've got a philosophical look at Stoic happiness, a critical take on positive psychology.
Some discussions from a philosophy forum about life's meaning, which sounds intriguing.
Yeah, and even stuff exploring the differences between being happy and having meaning. So our goal today is basically to unpack all of this, pull out the core ideas, look at the different perspectives on what happiness, or maybe a well-lived life, really means.
And try not to get too bogged down in academic jargon. Keep it accessible.
That's the plan. Okay, let's dig in.
Right. Well, the first thing that really strikes you looking at these sources is just how many ways there are to even define happiness. It's not just one simple thing.
No. Definitely not.
Yeah.
That first source, the study on Stoic philosophy, it immediately gives us two different senses. First, there's happiness as a state of mind. You know, that inner feeling, contentment, positive emotions, life satisfaction, the psychological side.
Okay, the feeling happy part.
Right. But then there's also happiness understood as a life that goes well, which is broader, considering things like overall well-being, flourishing, maybe external factors too.
That's a really useful distinction right off the bat. It moves beyond just feelings.
It does. And the Stanford Encyclopedia article
Yeah.
kind of echoes that. It talks about happiness as well-being or flourishing versus happiness as more of a psychological state.
Like hedonism, seeking pleasure, or life satisfaction, or just your emotional state.
Yeah. And it seems like for our chat today, we're probably leaning more towards that psychological side, right? The subjective experience.
I think so, yeah. That seems to be the focus in many of the sources.
Okay. Then the Dark Side of Happiness article, it adds more layers. It talks about happiness being linked to, like, the harmonious satisfaction of desires and goals.
Right, feeling like things are aligned.
And it brings in this term, subjective well-being, SWB. Can you maybe unpack that a little more? What does SWB really cover?
Sure. So subjective well-being, SWBB, it's basically how you as an individual evaluate your own life. It's not just fleeting feelings. It includes things like your overall life satisfaction, how good you feel about your self-esteem, and generally experiencing more positive emotions than negative ones over time.
So it's kind of bigger picture assessment.
Exactly. And that article also mentions that things like your general mood and even that Stoic idea of eudaimonia, which I know we'll get to, are sometimes included under this umbrella of happiness or well-being.
Okay, so already we're seeing it's complex. Inner state, life evaluation. Then the Reddit discussion comes in with a very boots-on-the-ground perspective.
How so?
People there talk about finding happiness in simple things, you know, love, friends, accomplishments, just daily stuff, the small pleasures.
Yeah, the everyday joys.
But then they start questioning it. Like, are these feelings just evolutionary programming, things that helped our ancestors survive but don't actually have, you know, intrinsic meaning?
That's a fascinating and frankly kind of unsettling question, isn't it? Are we just responding to biological cues?
It really makes you pause. And it highlights that tension you mentioned between just feeling good and finding something deeper, like meaning.
Absolutely. That tension between immediate pleasure and maybe a more lasting sense of purpose, it's a recurring theme.
And then, flipping things again, this article, Why Happiness is Overrated. It throws a curveball.
Oh, what's the argument there?
It suggests maybe we're chasing the wrong thing with this intense, ecstatic happiness idea.
Oh.
It proposes aiming for contentment instead.
Contentment. Okay, how is that different?
Well, the piece describes it as more stable, more achievable, something rooted in gratitude and the absence of pain rather than constant highs.
That's interesting. So less about peaks of joy and more about a steady, appreciative state.
Yeah, exactly. Less chasing, more appreciating what you have.
Yeah.
It feels potentially more sustainable.
That resonates. Maybe a more realistic goal for many people than constant, you know, bliss.
Right. Okay, so we've got these different ideas swirling around about what happiness is. Now let's shift to how these sources suggest we might actually achieve it.
And the Stoics are a great place to start there.
Definitely. That analytical study really dives into Stoic happiness, or eudaimonia.
Right. And for them, it's about living in agreement with nature and, crucially, with virtue.
Virtue. So it's not passive. It's about actively developing qualities. Wisdom, justice, courage, self-discipline.
Precisely. It's about inner character. And a huge part of it is accepting what's beyond our control.
That's the tough one, isn't it?
It is. And also fulfilling our duties to others, they called it philanthropy, and being really mindful about our judgments or reactions to things.
It sounds like real mental training. The study mentions disciplines, right? Like
Yeah.
discipline of desire, action, assent.
Yes. Training desire means accepting fate, what happens. Training action is about serving humanity virtuously. And training assent is about that mindful judgment, understanding our impressions correctly.
And they believed living this way virtuously is actually natural, like how we're meant to function.
That's the core idea, yes. Living according to virtue is living according to our rational nature. And here's where their categories get really interesting.
Okay.
They saw things as good, bad, or indifferent. Good is virtue, bad is vice, everything else. Wealth, health, reputation, sickness, poverty, those are indifferent.
Indifferent. But surely health is better than sickness.
From a practical standpoint, yes, they'd say health is preferred,
Huh.
but it's still indifferent in the sense that it doesn't determine your true happiness, your eudaimonia. That comes only from virtue.
Wow. So your happiness isn't dependent on external circumstances at all.
According to strict Stoicism, no. You use reason to deal with the indifferent things, to make preferred choices when you can, but your core well-being rests solely on your virtuous character and actions. Training helps you manage emotions tied to those externals.
That's quite a perspective, building this internal fortress almost.
In a way, yes. And the study also briefly contrasts this with some religious views.
Right. It mentioned Islam and Hinduism.
Yeah. In Islam, ultimate happiness is often tied to the hereafter, achieved through faith and righteousness. Hinduism, it notes, describes different types: physical, mental, spiritual.
And it had those categories, sattvic, rajasic, tamasic.
Exactly. Classifying general happiness based on qualities like purity, sattvic, passion, rajasic, or delusion, tamasic. And supreme happiness involves mental peace, maybe union with Brahman.
It's fascinating how these different frameworks conceptualize happiness, sometimes reaching beyond just this life.
It really broadens the picture. Now, shifting gears quite a bit, let's look at positive psychology.
Okay. But our source, beyond positive psychology, is
Exactly.
actually quite critical, isn't it?
It is. It really challenges the assumption often found in positive psychology that certain traits like optimism, forgiveness, kindness are just inherently good for us, always beneficial.
Wait, things like kindness or forgiveness can be bad? That seems counterintuitive.
Well, bad might be too strong, but the article argues they can have negative consequences depending on the context. It presents research showing exactly that.
Can you give an example?
Sure. The article mentions research on marriage. In generally healthy relationships, things like forgiveness and optimism tended to be beneficial.
Makes sense.
But in deeply troubled marriages, sometimes these same positive behaviors could actually be detrimental. For instance, maybe constantly forgiving serious betrayals without addressing the root cause, or being overly optimistic about a clearly failing relationship.
Would prevent necessary changes or lead to more hurt down the line.
Exactly. Or think about kindness always being kind and giving in a group might lead to being taken advantage of, which isn't great for your well-being in the long run. The point is, context matters hugely.
So it's not about the trait itself being good or bad, but how it interacts with the situation.
Precisely. Well-being comes from that interplay between our psychological characteristics and our environment. The article warns against labeling things as simply positive or negative without considering the context. It argues for studying people in different situations, both healthy and unhealthy individuals, over time.
That really complicates the picture. No easy answers, no one-size-fits-all approach to building well-being.
Definitely not. Which leads us neatly into another interesting source, the one about functional versus dysfunctional negative emotions.
Ah, yes, this one seemed really practical. Tell me more about that distinction.
Okay, so this model proposes a binary view. You have functional negative emotions. Think concern, sadness, annoyance, remorse, maybe regret. They feel unpleasant, sure, but they're generally tolerable.
And they might actually help you.
Yes, they often lead to adaptive behaviors because they tend to stem from rational beliefs about a negative event. Concern motivates preparation, sadness might signal a need for support, remorse can lead to amends.
Okay. And the dysfunctional ones.
Those are emotions like anxiety, depression, rage, crippling guilt, shame, morbid jealousy. They feel intolerable, overwhelming, and often lead to maladaptive behaviors like avoidance, aggression, shutting down. And crucially, they're often linked to irrational beliefs about the situation.
So, like my example earlier, concerned about a test versus debilitating anxiety based on predicting absolute disaster.
That's a perfect illustration, yes. The study found both types reduce well-being, obviously, but resilience helps mediate the impact of the functional ones. For the dysfunctional ones, both resilience and mindfulness seem important mediators.
So interventions should probably focus more on tackling those dysfunctional emotions,
Yeah,
helping people challenge the irrational beliefs behind them.
that's what the research suggests, yes. Reducing those dysfunctional responses seems key.
That really seems to connect back to the Stoic idea of examining our judgments, managing our reactions by questioning the underlying thoughts.
There's a definite parallel there, isn't there? Controlling the ascent to irrational impressions. Now, another really key distinction we need to cover is happiness versus meaning.
Right. The source is a happy life, different from a meaningful one. This was fascinating.
It really lays out some clear differences based on their research. What stood out to you?
Well, it found happiness is often about satisfying needs and wants. Very present-focused, sometimes fleeting. It's often about taking or receiving things linked to comfort.
Okay, the feel-good needs met aspect.
Yeah. Meaningfulness, though. It's different. Less about satisfying immediate needs, more about linking past, present, and future. It tends to last longer. And crucially, it often comes from giving to others.
Giving, interesting.
Yeah. And meaning can involve stress, challenges, effort, things not always associated with immediate happiness. Plus, it's strongly tied to self-expression, living in line with your values.
And that finding about giving versus taking is quite stark, isn't it? Giving contributes more to meaning than happiness, while taking boosts happiness but maybe not meaning so much.
It really challenges that idea that just getting what you want will make you fulfilled in a deep way.
It suggests that maybe pursuing meaning through things like deep relationships, helping others, purposeful work, expressing who you are might be a more reliable path, and happiness could be, well, almost a welcome side effect of that pursuit.
A byproduct, yeah, rather than the direct target.
And that Reddit discussion touches on this too, right? That struggle with pleasure, sometimes feeling empty.
Totally. People grappling with whether enjoyable activities have any inherent meaning. Some suggest, well, you just create your own meaning.
Through personal projects or creativity
Or helping others, that comes up again. Or maybe just accepting there's no grand cosmic purpose and just, trying to enjoy the ride or at least endure it.
The idea of legacy being remembered also seems to factor in for some as a source of meaning.
It really underscores that meaning feels like a very personal, almost existential construction, different from just chasing good feelings.
Absolutely. And weaving all this together, one thing that keeps coming up, implicitly or explicitly, is the importance of context and individual differences.
Yes, beyond positive psychology.
Yeah.
Hammered that home. What works for me might not work for you, or might even be harmful in a different situation.
No silver bullets. And the Stanford Encyclopedia piece calls happiness a mongrel concept because it means different things to different people and in different contexts.
Right. It mentioned how empirical findings are complex. Like, yes, most people say they're happy, but things like adapting to circumstances or the effect of money, it's not straightforward.
No, and wealth, for instance, seems to have diminishing returns on happiness past a certain point. And we see cultural differences, too. Some societies might report high happiness despite lower material wealth.
Suggesting other factors, community, purpose, maybe acceptance, play a huge role.
Exactly. It's not a simple equation.
Okay, so wrapping this up, this deep dive really shows happiness isn't simple. It's multifaceted. It can be an inner state, a life evaluation, maybe tied to virtue, maybe linked to meaning.
We've seen different paths propose Stoic self-discipline, managing emotions functionally, connecting meaningfully, finding contentment.
And the huge role of context. What constitutes flourishing seems really personal and situation dependent.
It really does. So maybe the takeaway isn't a simple recipe for happiness. Perhaps it's more about understanding these different facets.
Right. Less about chasing constant bliss, maybe.
Perhaps. And more about figuring out what gives your life meaning, building resilience for the inevitable tough times, and getting better at navigating your own emotional landscape.
So thinking about that distinction between happiness and meaning and how much context matters, maybe a final thought for you, the listener, is this. What parts of your life genuinely contribute most to your sense of flourishing? Not just fleeting pleasure, but deeper well-being or meaning. And, maybe more importantly, are you actively prioritizing those things?
And perhaps reflecting on your own emotional responses, which ones tend to be functional, helping you cope and adapt, and which might be more dysfunctional, stemming from maybe unhelpful beliefs, could give you some real insights for your own journey.
Definitely something to think about. That's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening.